So, we are live. Good evening, everyone. I hope everybody's well. I'm just going to wait a few moments while we bring everyone on. If you are online tonight watching us, thank you very much. If you are here for the first time, thank you very much. If you are for the first time, press that follow or like button on the actual Palace Drum Clinic Facebook page, and you can basically get all the information or notifications on what's coming up, including obviously lovely, fantastic things like this. So we're just going to just wait to see if people coming online. We've got a few people on. Also, if you are watching on replay, please hashtag replay, and obviously then we can see your comments as well. I'm just getting a few bits up while we're just getting people on. During the whole evening, if you wish to say hello, please put it in the comments below. I'll read out as much as I possibly can. Also, if you want to sort of ask a question, that's the place to put it in the comments as well. And if you've got any anecdotes or any stories you want to share between yourselves or actually online, so out live, that's absolutely fine as well. Please put them in. It's basically conversational. So we've got a few people watching here, so I think we should basically start. So, welcome everyone to another PD chat show. We've got some fantastic evening set for you this evening. But just to say, if you haven't liked us already, please do it on the Facebook page on the Palace Drum Clinic. But we'd just like to welcome our guests. Obviously, I would be absolutely lost without my two panel members, Mr. Pete Cater and Rob Bryan. Are you okay, guys, tonight?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, all good.
Yeah, Rob's, I was going to say Rob's lost his voice there, but it came out there. Yeah, and obviously we have got a special guest tonight, and he is a very special guest. We're very lucky to get him, Mr. Don Lombardi. How are you, sir?
Thank you so much. This is my first time on the show, and what an honor it is too.
Yes, well, the honour is all ours.
Yeah.
So, what's it like over there? Obviously, you're over the pond at the moment. Just for the listeners, like, what's your time over there, and how's the weather? Because us Brits love talking about the weather.
Well, this is why everybody moves to California. I don't want to tell them what the weather is because we're already crowded here, but it's heading to 80 degrees here. We are in November, and it's 12 noon for me here. So we do have a little bit of a time difference, but been looking forward to this very much. And I'll tell you, with all the history and the experience you three guys have, I could be interviewing you for a couple of hours.
Oh, that might be coming later on, but just whoever's online, let's just say a quick hello. So, Ollie Uziskin, Peter James, Richie Burns, Sue Benson, Joe Morris, Kenneth Russell Everett, Peter Williams. Hello, Mum and Dad. They're my biggest fans. So, yes, people are coming on. So, yes, guys, put your comments there, questions, obviously to us or our special guest at Don. So there we go. So everyone out there knows us. That obviously, we've been here for quite a few many times now. I did read in one of the comments, somebody actually, why watching this is their vaccine towards Strictly Come Dancing. So thank you very much for that comment. That was you, was it?
I can't stand it.
Oh, there we go. But everybody knows that we usually start with like a subject, and it basically sort of seems to organically roll along throughout the evening. We've got a crack of a subject tonight, and I think this is one that everyone hopefully can get involved with. Really, it's our subject tonight. Really, is like the history and legacy of classic American brands such as Gretsch, Ludwig, Slingerland, compared to the British brands, like Premier, Ajax, and those kind of people. So, Don, I want to come to you first, obviously, as our special guest. Obviously, DW Drums, which obviously the umbrella's got is quite big now, so including Gretsch and just recently Slingerland as well, isn't it? So,
yes.
What's your feelings on the going back into the classic American brands?
Well, it's interesting. Growing up, I started playing drums when I was 14, and Ludwig was by far the leading brand here. I would say twice the size of Slingerland, which would have been second at that point. Rogers would have been a little less than Slingerland, and Gretsch was kind of the custom drum company back in those days. They might have had 3 or 4% of the market, but they were being made in the late 50s in New York, which is where bebop and jazz was flourishing. So because they were close to that area and that's where those drummers were, they kind of picked up the idea of being, that the jazz sound. Not that they couldn't be used for any type of music, but they just kind of got pegged as that great Gretsch sound. And not to say that Gretsch drums weren't used on tons of rock records, in the 60s and 70s too. Our dear friend and somebody I know who we all love, Jeff Porcaro, did most all of his recording on a Gretsch drum set. So you had Ludwig, Slingerland, Rogers. The biggest change in the American music market with those predominant drum companies was when the Beatles landed over here. Thank you very much. On behalf of Ludwig, their business doubled overnight, literally. And my quiz question, that was what year?
1964.
1964.
Exactly right. That's right.
February the 9th, 1964 was the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yep, and that was true. Ludwig's business just doubled. Everybody was going to be playing drums. I saw for the first time somebody holding their sticks quite differently than I learned. Right, Pete?
Yes, right.
So it was an exciting time for the drumming community. All three major American drum brands, Ludwig, Slingerland, Rogers, were kind of in their heyday in the 60s and in the early 70s also. And then, long story short, as that kind of waned a little bit, and drum companies became part of the business model of larger corporations from the entrepreneurial start, from the Rogers, the Gretsch, Ludwig, they got sold off to bigger corporations, and that's where the opportunity came in, where somebody could start a company, which I had no idea DW was ever going to be more than kind of a hobby at the time. We could start a company making more custom. There wasn't really a small custom drum company anymore. And the problem that the American drum companies, kind of were not able to fight off was the foreign competition, where Tama, Pearl, Yamaha a little bit later than that, but they were making drums, though Japanese companies that were making drums in Taiwan, where the labor rate was under $1 an hour, and Ludwig, Slingerland, Rogers were at the $7, $8 an hour range. So little by little, they kind of lost the market share to the other companies. But as far as their presence over here compared to the drum companies that were bringing drums over across the pond, Premier was the main one that I knew, because there was major artists playing Premier. But how did you guys see American companies over there?
Pete, I'm going to come to you first, because obviously you saw a lot of this happening, didn't you, when you was growing up as well?
Yeah, I think because all of the, because I'm a second generation drummer, because my dad was a drummer, and all of his drum heroes played Slingerland or Ludwig or Gretsch, and what made it particularly exotic at that time in that post-war period was that there were embargoes on imported goods, and you couldn't go to a drum shop and buy anything other than a British drum set. You could go and buy Premier or Ajax, and some of the smaller ones like John Gray and so on. But until about 1963, I believe, there was this isolationist thing that was going on here post World War II, where the only way you could get an American set of drums into this country was to go and work on the Queen Mary and sail back and forth to New York or whatever, and buy one on 48th Street and take all the badges off and bring it home in your old drum cases and hope that you didn't get caught. So I think it was a big part of the appeal was that, for us here back then, we looked to the United States for everything. And, in a lot of ways we still do, but much less so. I mean, then it was really, really very, 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 the influence of the American drummers and the American drum brands was absolutely massive. That was what every young drummer of my father's generation here in the UK aspired to. And you couldn't buy those drums. So it was when, in about 1963, when Ivor Arbiter, when the trade embargoes were lifted and Ivor Arbiter started importing Ludwig, if you are a young rocker, Ringo was your man. And if you were an older drummer of, say, my dad's age group, Joe Morello was your man, and they were two massive Ludwig artists, and that really, if you look back through the archive pictures of all kinds of bands playing in the UK in the 60s, and 19 drummers out of 20 were playing Ludwig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Buddy Rich in those days too, with the influence that he had. I know
But Buddy was kind of, he was sort of slightly off the radar here until he brought the big band here for the first time at the end of March in 1967. Because in the early 60s, when he was in Vegas with Harry James, he wasn't really he was somebody who, you know, people remembered from records with Tommy Dorsey and records with Jazz at the Philharmonic and the drum battle with Gene. But he wasn't really a presence here until 1967 when the band came over for the first time, and then that all changed. And I grew up in a house where all I heard coming out of the record player was Joe Morello and Buddy Rich for my entire childhood. That was, those two guys, they are my forever drummers. And I've been influenced by and admired hundreds of other players, but those two will always occupy a special place for me. Mm. It's a good place. It's a good place to start.
No, it's not a bad place. Rob, obviously you were a little bit later, so seeing this, but we all know that obviously you are a DW man to start with, but you love your vintage gear as well, and you are such a big Ringo fan, so obviously the Ludwig side of things as well. For you, how was that kind of the influence of the American towards the British kind of thing? Because I do know you do like your old English heritage as well in the drum sector.
Yeah, I do. And just like Pete, my dad was a player before me. And actually, he owned, and he used to tell me stories when I was much younger, saying that he owned a Rogers, a Ludwig. He never had a Gretsch. But he said he always preferred Premier, because Premier, as we know, they were British based, so they could make smaller drums and they were available in the same country. Whereas you could only get like 22-inch bass drums most of the time in England, certainly in Bath and Bristol. If Dad ever went to look at a Ludwig kit, it was always 22, 13, 16. And he was playing in a jazz trio. But to be up with all the kids, he kind of bought one. So he would turn up to this trio gig with just the wrong kit and realise it straight away, and then go back to the shop a few days later and trade it in for a little 18-inch Premier kit. I think he sort of was keeping up with the Joneses. But I was always a bit like, well, that was kind of your story, Dad. But for me, I'm still, like Pete said, I was watching Buddy Rich and all the TV shows. I was loving that. And I loved Ian Pace. So Ian Pace was a Ludwig drummer. Mick Fleetwood, and of course, Ringo. So I had this, and I still got this romance for American drums, the vintage American drums. But I own a few of them, and I've sold some. I still have a few. And I know that when I go to a certain session, they're just not going to do the job. If I had in that studio 5 or 6, drum anoraks like us, we'd all love it. We'd be smelling the shell and looking at. But the truth is, it probably isn't going to have the tunability of my DW kit. So sometimes I'll take bits along with me to various sessions and have a sort of Frankenstein kit where sometimes I might combine them a little bit. But having been to Tristan's shop in Drumatic, he's been a guest of ours here. I've sat on some of those old Premier kits, and they are wonderful, and they were so very well made. But they just—it's almost like looking at maybe you see the Ludwig and the Gretches as Superman, and the Premiers somehow look like Norman Wisdom or something in comparison. They don't quite sort of add up to some people in their minds, and it's just simply kind of not true. So I've got a love for both. Now, if you're going to ask me, do I own a Premier kit of that period? Actually, I don't, not yet, but I'm looking at an old Olympic at the moment. But for me, that's very much how it was. And when I sit behind those old Ludwigs, I love it. It makes you feel, and the Rogers I've got, it makes you feel very different when you play. It gives you a different vibe, certain things you wouldn't do on those drum kits that you would do on the DW, and vice versa.
I think those classic brands throughout generations, we're looking at going back 40, 50 years. You have to kind of look at who was running them, who was owning them at that time, what their market share was. Again, when they started making drums so fast, Ludwig, they just they started laminating the plies when they were flat and bending them around, and they weren't all that round, but they worked. And so there was various periods that they went through. And when they sold the bigger companies, interesting, I was doing a tour just before we all shut down, and I'd been asked when we started making DW drums after the first couple of years, what makes them sound so good, as if we had invented something. And I'm saying, well, we do this, this, and this. And in essence, what we did is made them the way they were made in the early 50s, just going back to having reinforcing hoops at the top and the bottom, which was standard procedure when you looked at Ludwig, Slingerland, and Rogers back in the day, in those older years. They were taken out when they got sold to bigger companies because it takes twice as long to make a drum shell that way. So it was much more cost effective to put more plies in and leave the reinforcing hoop out. Then the educational side of it is, what did the reinforcing hoop do? Well, it didn't make the shell stronger. Yes, it did, but that's not the purpose of it. It raised the pitch of the shell almost 1.5 octaves. So because you were having more wood at the top and the bottom of the shell, and it would resonate at a higher frequency. So there was reasons why drummers had to live with certain things throughout history that weren't necessarily drummer based. And then it's just a matter of kind of bringing a little bit of drummer's mentality or musical sensibility kind of back into it. I guess I've heard stories, we ended up with a 14 by 14 floor tom because Gene Krupa wanted one, and the lampshade company down the street, which was making wooden lampshades, is where Ludwig went and they grabbed one. And I don't know if you guys have heard that story through the years or not too, but that's what we kind of lived with. Or the one that I intimately know, because the first thing I ever invented was the adjustable trap case seat, which was a throne like the Buddy Rich throne, Pete.
I've got one of the reissue ones over here, just out of shot.
Okay, yeah. So in studying with Freddie Gruber, it was really important for your bass drum technique to sit on something really solid. And back in the 60s, 70s, the only throne that was really good was the Rogers. The other thrones were not as stable. Rogers seemed to have, a really good tripod bass throne. Still not as good as the cylindrical throne, but the cylindrical throne were all 24 inches. So unless you happened to be perfectly at that height, you were stuck. So I just thought, what if I made one that would adjust up and down and would still allow you to store your stuff inside of it? So that was kind of a clever little idea I first came out with. Never finding out the answer until many years later when I was talking to a gentleman that was actually in a retirement home, used to work at Slingerland, and we were talking about their snare wires. But I said, the seats, why did they make them 24? I figured, well, here's 3 drummers. They probably surveyed you guys and said, what would you like? What would be, or survey 100 drummers, and what do they come up with? And he said, well, it's because we could get 2 out of a 4x8 piece of plywood. So if we made it 25, we'd have to throw the rest of the wood away. So we drummers live with these decisions sometimes that aren't all that literally based on for our best good. But that's where it's important. I think Premier was always, at least in my mind over here, a little bit more of a custom drum company. They were good size, but they were a small percentage of the market over here. So you had the feeling you were buying more of a custom kit, or could get it more customized. And as drummers, I think, more than any other, musician, we like to put things where you can't get it. So you want to make it so you can have your own custom kit and have everything comfortably exactly where it should be. But you asked a question a little bit earlier, Matthew, about why there seemed to be this difference between, American companies and English companies. And why is it, how did you put it? You were saying...
Well, I was just about to lead on to that. It's like, why did the Americans really go for sort of the Premier kits? It's like, they're really, they all pay, top dollar for it. And then I was basically saying off camera, basically, but then again, we would do the same for the Gretchen Slingerlands and New Ludwig as well. But why is it? Because obviously we know, because we're in this country, about the American brands. But what is it purely because? Is it because of the history of Ringo? Because obviously he played on before Ludwig, or is it something else?
That question was something I had in my mind too, and somebody kind of answered it in a very strange way. Not to forget Sonar too, which was also the same thing, popular over here, coming from Germany. I was traveling years ago, sitting next to a gentleman on an international flight, and he was a wine salesman with one of the major wine companies. And somehow we got talking about him putting on hundreds of thousands of miles a year, more flying than I'd ever believe. Every day of the life he's going somewhere, because they had vineyards and they had businesses in like 7 or 8 of the major countries in the world. So me thinking as a manufacturer, well, that's really cool because it cuts your manufacturing costs. You're in California, you're in France, you're in Italy. He says, no. He says, it's because we have to make French wine because that's what we get money for in America. We have to make a wine in America because that's what they want in Italy. Everybody wants it from a different place, is why we have our factories there, not because we want to sell it there. So I think there's a little bit of beauty is in the mind of the beholder. I don't know why that happened, other than that it was hard to get and hard to find out that much about. I know as a kid, there was always a real Sonar, Premiere, were always kind of this mystery, to them, because we didn't know them that well. And probably the same for you over there, for us. And everybody makes good quality drums, and they all make great quality drums through various points of their careers, too.
We've got a couple of people just coming on, so we'll say hello to them. Mike Tubman, Ark and Daz, Ian Stock, Steve Bonham, Dave Brown, David Homer, Dave Patrick, Glyn Jones, Matthew Devonish, Graham Martin, thank you very much for coming. Why we're just, so Richie Burns has just basically put, a dear friend of his, Ron Bowden, drummer with the Kinney Ball, was in Chicago with the ball band, and he sold his premier snare drum and bought a Luddy 400, and he'd used up till he died a few years ago. Well, it's the most recorded snare drum ever, isn't it? So it's a general standard, isn't it? Guys, if you've got any questions, or if you own any of these kind of stuff we're talking about, put it in. It'd be very, very interesting to know what people have out there. As you well know, some of us are a bit of a collectors. We call it disease, very happy disease. We don't want to get cured at all, as long as we can basically still pay the rent. But it's all good. But obviously, also, if you're watching for the first time, please just press like on the Facebook page on the Palace Drum Clinic. It's good. I just want to come to the kind of the sound of everything, because obviously everything's like, you get they talk about the great Gretsch sound. Obviously that's their slogan and everything else. Did people back, especially in America, Don, did they basically go for sound, or was it popularity, or was it sort of finish, the raps, or what was it that basically made these things popular?
Well, same as anywhere, I think there was a certain amount of popularity, as you'd mentioned, I think, Pete, when Ludwig hit with Ringo, everybody, and you had your favorite drummers who were playing Ludwig. Certainly artists' affiliation with drum companies, especially back in those days, was very much a selling point, I think, for a lot of young drummers. But then there was the actual sound of the instrument too, which kind of, at the end of the day, is what put the kind of in the relationship between the drummer and the drum company, who you were going to buy, what your favorite was going to be. Me growing up, looking at specifically sound of drums, there was Gretsch and there was Camco, which was an even smaller company, custom company here. And they were very custom companies, and there was a big difference in the sound between the two. Basically, Gretsch did not have a reinforcing hoop inside the shell, so it was a much lower fundamental. Camco did have the reinforcing hoop, continued to have it, even though by this point, the other American drum companies had stopped putting that in, so that gave them a little different sound. And the difference for Gretsch in particular, and that kind of timing is always important in one's life and in the manufacturing world too. As Gretsch drums were used in Chicago a lot by the jazz drummers, as bebop became more popular, the way you approached the drum set became completely different. The bass drum wasn't on 1, 2, 3, and 4, wasn't the timekeeper anymore, as you guys all know. And the Gretsch drums, the way they were built, had a little quicker decay, a quicker fundamental, almost as if they were gated, not in an electronic kind of way, but they worked really well if you started approaching the instrument and playing all the different drums as part of patterns. They musically kind of went together nicely. They didn't run into each other. So coincidentally, the way the Gretsch drums were made and the way music was being played in those days, they kind of really melded together. So it worked well for a jazz live club, environment. And then Camco, was a shell construction that was a little bit different, and was the only. We continued with that shell construction when we started making DW. I really think for the first 10 years, people wondered why the drums sounded different than the other American traditional drum companies, and we didn't make a big thing out of the way we were doing it, but it took them about 10 years to figure out, well, maybe the reinforcing hoop does do something, and it gave it a much lower fundamental and different decay. And then when we started making our own shells, we were able to experiment with a million different ways of doing things that had never been really attempted before. Different woods, different layups, different ways you lay up the drums, which can very much change the fundamental. For DW, not having artist relations people, for the first many, many years, it was the microphone that I've often said was kind of our biggest artist relations person, because the producers would use them in their studios and the drummers would go, whoa, that sounds really, really interesting to me. Tommy Lee became an official DW artist, as he is again today. And he played, it was an epiphany for me. He was 19 years old, and he came and sat down, maybe he was in his early 20s, happened to have a DW kit when he came to get his pedal work done. He sat down and played on it, and he just says, I've never heard anything like this. And I'm thinking, well, it's a good sounding drum set. I mean, I've heard a lot of drums that sound really good. What do you mean you never heard anything like this? Well, he grew up when he started playing drums with an imported kit, and he was just used to that sound, and he hadn't heard a drum set that had a long decay, a long sustain. They were just going up to do the Dr. Feelgood album in Canada, so he actually bought a kit. I said, we don't have artists, we don't have endorsements. This was in the mid 80s. We were making pedals and stands. We weren't really officially making drum sets then as part of our business. But it turned the light on for me that there was a whole generation of people out there that didn't grow up with we just grow up thinking we know what American drums, we know what a good drum sounds like, because we grew up with them. But there was generations, a young generation, a new generation of drummers out there who maybe weren't that aware of it. So it gave me the impetus to stop teaching 48 students a week and playing 6 nights a week and saying, let's try this and see if a drum company could actually work in the late 80s. So sound, I think, is at the end, sound is what's going to, give you the stability or the credibility, I think, of what people are looking for. But it's true, you have to become cool too. The DW pedal was kind of the same thing. The Camco pedal was by far the best pedal that was out there in the day. You'd use a Camco pedal or a Speed King, pretty much. That was the two go-to pedals. Rogers had a good, decent pedal also, a little different feel with a solid footboard. But most of the jazz guys were playing Camco pedals. And that was the one product that we started making when I started making drums. It was just the pedals in the late 70s and 80s. But the DW pedal was sold to aficionados who were studio guys and guys that were, playing pros that were playing for a living. Wasn't until we had a lot of rock drummers using them, because I made it so they wouldn't break with the chain and sprocket and the plate and the ball bearings, and that it became kind of cool to have one. And then we kind of had our little Ludwig moment in 1974 where it's like, hey, I got a DW pedal. I was happy because you wouldn't know maybe how good it was until you practiced for a long time, but at least it wasn't going to be getting in your way if you were practicing. So a long-winded answer to, I think marketing is a lot of it, and artists are a big part of what makes people, bring attention to certain drum brands. But I think more and more with the internet, kids are getting more educated about different options, different sounds, and what they want. But that's why it's fun to have old collectible drums. If you can get an old collectible Premier kit, I've got some old Ludwig drums. Obviously, I've got a lot of Slingerland drums now because we're working on rebranding that and really bringing out the classic sound of the Radio King drum, made with like newer equipment, so we can get it really round and doing things that would improve the manufacturing process, but not change the integrity of the actual shell itself. So that's
definitely look forward to hearing those, because We've got, well, part of our umbrella, as you well know, we're at the UK National Drum Fair, that's where we started. Simon Wagstaff, I think he's got now one of the biggest collections of Slingerland kits, I think, in Europe at the moment. I say at the moment because I don't know what's happening. But yeah, it's they're amazing. So thank you very much for keeping that legacy going, Don. Thank you. Now, I'm in the minority here because obviously Pete and Rob, their dads were drummers. My dad was a brass player, but my uncle was a drummer, so there's the connection there. But when I was growing up, for me, it was Premier for me, and my first proper snare drum, which is in the garage at the moment. It's a Premier. I'll never get rid of it. It's very special to me. But I always wanted that kind of Gretsch sound. I wanted a Gretsch kit, and I'm obviously very fortunate now to own a late 50s, early 60s, which is a fantastic kit. Now, Pete, when growing up, obviously, you say about your dad and everything else, but Premier obviously was sort of the king for us, wasn't it? So the king of instruments, really, in the British Isles. What were you basically playing on as a youth? And because obviously we well know you're documented as a Premier in Dorsey a few years ago as well. What actually happens like with the whole kind of Premier thing for you?
Well, for me,
Yeah,
it's very interesting, and one of the things that young drummers obsess about is having some sort of affiliation with a drum company. It's one of those kind of things that I think young players aspire to, and I understand it. And and what I'm always saying to them is, you've got to be in this for the long haul. These things will not necessarily happen overnight. And I didn't have a full blown um, drum set endorsement with a company, which it so happens was. The one thing I've still got left is the bass drum head, Premier. Uh, that didn't happen until I was 49 years old. And it really just, I was at the London Drum Show at Olympia, and Craig, who was the general manager of the company, said, I've been there about 10 minutes, and he just kind of pounced on it. If you know Craig, he's a big guy with a big personality. And he said, come with us. We'll make you anything you want. And so they did. And it was because of the history and legacy of a British drum company and me being a British player, it felt like a very natural thing to do. I mean, my first affiliation with any kind of drum company at all has to do with this bass drum head over on my left hand side, which dates back to when I was 18. And at that time, all we wanted was American drums. We all knew about Premier and Pearl, and Tama were on the scene by then, but American drums were still the holy grail of instruments. And throughout all my childhood and adolescence, that was what we aspired to. So my first affiliation was through the local Slingerland dealer in Birmingham. When I was 18, I got a bit of attention because of some of the things I'd done. I've been on television a bit and won a couple of awards, and I taught myself to play some pretty cool stuff. And so this Slingerland bass drum head is the one little memento of that first affiliation. But as far as Premier was concerned, that obviously happened much, much, much later. And because they were going through a bit of a renaissance at the time, which has sadly kind of stalled now, it felt like a very good place to be. And of course, we all know what happened. And latterly, I'm playing British Drum Company, which is what Premier could have been if they'd had the vision. And so that's kind of where we're up to now.
Mm. So Rob,
Yeah.
what were you playing on growing up? What did you want to play on when you was growing up?
Well, my first kit at 9 years old, 10 years old, was a Premier Resonator. 18, 10, 12, 14, and their sort of 400 copy snare drum with a single bead, which is a wonderful drum. And I cut my teeth on that for 3 or 4 years and annoyed everyone, all my neighbours and everyone else. And then, of course, I was still looking at the record covers of Buddy and, or Joe Morello, all those guys. So I kind of liked the look of Gretsch drums, but I wanted Ludwig because, as I said earlier, all my favourite drummers were on Ludwig. And even though my dad was telling me that Premier was going to be a better thing for me, I just had to have one. So reluctantly, one Christmas, he went to Steve Gardner's shop down in Bath, Assembly Music, and he said, my son wants to get rid of the Premier. He's mad, but can we have a Ludwig? And he said, yeah, we got 22, 12, 13, 16 with a 400. How's that? In red maple. And it was just like, yes, please. Blue olive badge was beautiful. Absolutely lovely kit. It had the stupid... you have to get the wrench, you know, to put the tom holders on and stuff. You know, that was a bit
consulate. Yeah.
That was a pain. But yeah, it was a beautiful kit. But when I started playing professionally, I was working for Steve, and he was distributing Sonor from Bath in England. He was the UK distribution, along with Sabian Cymbals. So I ended up with both of those products, you know, and endorsing them, and you know, hung out with Bob Zildjian and stuff. And I think we spoke about that once before, which was amazing. And, you know, of course, Sonor, fantastic drums, really love them. But, you know, this love of the American drums, it was always there. And, you know, something you were saying earlier, if I could just say about the sound, certain guys will always, certain drummers will always, you know, wax lyrical about something, you know, and sometimes when they sit behind it and play it, it's not what they thought it was going to be. And it's almost like, after I've seen them visit, you know, one of the shops in England for the vintage stuff, they come back and say, Rob, it really wasn't for me. And it's almost like a sadness, you know, a veil has sort of fallen, because this one thing they thought was going to be the best experience ever, you know, wasn't quite what they thought. The flip side of that, sometimes it is. And they say, yeah, I traded in my modern kit, Rob, for this vintage kit. But, you know, for me, it's always been... sound. If we're going to look at that, you know, is a Gretsch from 1955 a great sounding kit? Is it the kit I want? If I could buy endless kits, of course I'd buy them. But for me, being a player, I need to know it's going to speak the language that I need it to speak when I want to play it. I'm not a fan of stacking kits up and not using them. I try to use them as much as I can on different things, and I think. You know, some of these guys who were thinking, should I try? Go and try them and see, and either fall in love with it or just realise that it was kind of a lovely thought until I sat behind it. You know, they're two very different things. Because as I said earlier, I certainly wouldn't take my '68 Ludwig Super Classic on a tour with anybody. You know, because you know by next Wednesday it'd be falling apart, and that's not what I bought it for. I bought it for the fact of having it and using it on various sessions where I know people like Stuart Bruce last week will say, bring the DW set up, but could you bring that Ludwig bass drum just in case? Or could you bring the da-da-da-da? I certainly won't bring the 13-inch tom, because like Don said, it certainly isn't round. I'm not sure what shape it is, but it isn't round, my 13. I've got to take it to Tristan to shave a bit off it and try and make it into some sort of round shape so it sounds like a drum.
I've got a 13 story for you.
Go
Go on then. Yeah.
That's the classic size drum that everybody had the problem with back in the day. And it was me and my friends, because it was typical to have drum sets where the toms were 1 inch apart, 12, 13, 14, 14, 15, 16. And for a long time, 2 inches became more popular, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And I would sit on somebody's kit on occasion, sit in, and their 13, they got a 12, their 13, it would sound great. And I would just think, my tuning sucks. Whatever I did with mine, I cannot get it to have the same pitch bend as I could the 12. So the long story short is, this is why we started doing this at DW. I talked to somebody at Slingerland again, and when they made a kit for Buddy, or one of their major artists, he said, you know, we would timbre match them because we wanted to be sure the pitch of the 12 and the 13 were far enough apart, because you could literally have the pitch of the 12 be lower than the 13, or the 13 higher than the 12. And so you're going to get your 12 where you want it, and you're going to play it, and you're going to get a nice pitch bend like a glass vibrating on a table. And you're obviously going to tune the head of the 13 lower than the 12 because you want to have a lower fundamental, but you're way out of the range of the shell. So thus the 13 is never, and when I played on my shell, sure enough, just like you tick-tock two sticks, you can get, you know, an octave apart almost. So the same thing can happen with the nature of wood, because you don't know whether you're getting it from the core of the tree or the outside of the tree. You know, you're just getting veneer to make the drum shells out of. So that's where this whole idea of pitch matching came in. They did it for certain special artists. We tried it and thought this would be good, and then we we kind of worked our way into a corner because then we had to do it on everything that we make. So that's the idea. And although we put a note in the shell, we're not saying go to the piano and make it that note. We're just saying we know that the shells themselves are fundamentally going to be, separated apart. So although there are some artists that actually their drum techs will know what the guy wants, and he'll want the top head tuned to the note, the bottom head tuned like a quarter lower than the note or something to get them kind of close. So it came out to be kind of an interesting little asset for guys to use also. But anyway, that's why 13s were always the one that seemed to be I don't know why I can't get, it's really interesting to see you had that same story.
Whenever I tech up a kit, I never take a 12 and a 13 together. Yeah. Because even with some of the best techs in the world that I've had, they're like, this is a headache for me, Rob. Can we not just go 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 or whatever? So that's what I always do. And it's just more musical and it seems to work. That Ludwig kit that I spoke about earlier, 12, 13, 16, that taught me that 13 was off of that tom holder quicker than you can say Jebediah Springfield. It was off that kit and it was 12, 16 or 13, 16. I couldn't have the two together. I just couldn't do it.
Talk about vintage drums. I'll share a moment with you guys that just happened to me. This is a little personal story. So I get a call from Alex Acuna, and he says he's going in to do a session, and the producer, this young hot real producer in town, wanted to know if he could get a vintage DW kit. So Alex called me, and my first response was, well, we don't have vintage DW kits. And he said, no, he wanted something like 80, 81. I'm thinking, holy shit. I had to check out my driver's license to see how old I was, but I actually have a vintage DW kit. So that was an awakening moment anyway. Nice to know. And we're making them, we can still make the guy the exact same kit out of the same shell construction as he did then. So I don't know why the vintage one would be that much better than the newer one. But anyway, I went for it. It sounded good to me. I got him one of our first kits we made in 1979. They were happy.
Wow.
So,
amazing. We'd love to see that.
Yeah,
we've got a couple of people coming on: Mark Scully, Joyce Harris, Ben Roberts, Sharon Elizabeth, Paul Roberts, Stephen Danowski Jr. I think I've said Ian Stock as well. A couple of people are putting obviously what you have. Fantastic. It's lovely to see what you all guys have. There's a couple of questions. What we just touched on Buddy for a little bit. Is from Richie Burns. He says, "Hi Don. Did Buddy ever play any DW drums? Because obviously we know he didn't play them out. But did he actually come and actually play any of your drums at all?"
There's a whole story. We don't have enough time to go into that.
I know that story.
There was a forum that just went on about that. The answer is yes. And
there's a video out there of him playing them.
Well, he played them for a second in a game show that was on TV, and that was his test of it. But he also, I'd love to see if anybody had videos of him playing them when they were on the road. But want me to give you the very long story, very short?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
There's background to this. And all the information that was on the post, because the kit we made for Buddy that he played for a period of time is owned by a collector, I think in Florida now. And I talked with him in depth about it to be sure it was the same kit, and I believe it was based on some of the earmarkings of it. But how it all came to be, in real short, is fortunate for me, I got to hang out with Buddy on many of occasions when he would come to town to play the Carnation Pavilion, because our mutual friends were Frank DeVito and Nick Ceroli. I was a student of Nick Ceroli's when I was 16, 17, 18. Knew Frank for all my life as a player in town and a friend. And Frank was a lifetime friend of Buddy's from New York, and Nick was a new friend of Buddy's that he really liked because, Nick was such an amazing drummer. So when Buddy would come to town, he'd go out to their houses one of the days that he was here, and he would usually do it twice a year. And they would invite me to come over, I'm the third wheel. And they would talk to Buddy just like we are. I'm intimidated, I'm around Buddy Rich. I'm trying to be cool and everything. But in any event, at one point in time, when Buddy had his contract up with either Pearl or Slingerland, whichever he was with, they weren't going to renew it. And none of the American drum companies were interested in renewing his contract because he was used to getting paid every 3 years. He got a fee, annual fee for playing whatever drums he was going to be playing. And so he asked Frank DeVito to call some of the other companies, basically Tama Pearl, and I think Yamaha was in the picture at that point, And I gave Frank the connections because Frank didn't know who to contact over there. And so the answer was they weren't interested either. So we're at Nick Ceroli's house, and Frank talks to Buddy about the fact that nothing's really happening. And he says, why don't you take the kids' drums out, pointing to me, meaning, you know, we could make him basically a DW kit, a la the old Camco drums, which he was certainly aware of. I will have to say the very first time I met him, I wasn't sure how it was going to go, because he walked into Nick's house. Nick said, this is Don Lombardi, who makes, you know, the DW drums. And he shook my hand and he says, oh, you make the drums with the clocks on them. I thought, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure if he likes the round lug or he doesn't like the round lug. We did become friends after that. So anyway, to shorten the story up, he said, okay, you know, he was fine with the sound. I'm paranoid about making him a snare drum, because like, even when he endorsed certain drum brands, if he didn't like the drum, there's some, you know, stories of him throwing it across the stage. So in the snare drum is like to make Buddy Rich a snare drum. You know, in the toms, I didn't think so much about the bass drum. Anyways, that's the one that got me. So he said on a Monday or Tuesday, okay, let's do that. I'm going to be playing a game show the following week at which was like your Meet Your Fantasy or something. It was just like he played for like 5 minutes and this guy won the contest and got to meet Buddy Rich or something. That's probably the video that you saw. I think that's on YouTube somewhere. So I'm there. I take the kit down there. I set it up before the TV show. They do the filming. I break it down. He comes over afterwards, and because that was like, yeah, let me try it on the show and I'll see. He says, yeah, I'll take it out. So I'm like, that's cool. I said, he says, get it on the bus. I said, when does that leave? He says, Friday. And this is like Monday or Tuesday of the same week. So I'm like, okay, what would you like? Well, 26-inch bass drum. We didn't have 26-inch bass drums. We didn't have white marine pearl. You know, we had some of the tom sizes and we could make them a snare drum. Anyway, calls from friends. Blameyer sent me the material. Keller had them overnight a shell, a 26. We got it Thursday, and we had to have the drums on the bus Friday by noon. So in this post, it was like, yeah, DW made him a drum set we heard. And I'm like, it wasn't DW, it was me and John. I mean, it was like there was two people that were doing this. They make it sound like it's a big company or something. So we did everything we could to rush it and get it through and get it on the, and I made it like we made Camco drums. So my mistake was I made him a 6-ply 26-inch bass drum. So we took it out on the road, played it. I get a call from Steve Peck, his road manager. They were in New York. So they traveled from LA to New York and he'd used it. He kept the Ludwig kit on the back of the bus as a second kit. But Steve called and said, Buddy wants to talk to you. He said, we're just having a heck of a time with the bass drum. We can't get the boom out of it. We put one felt strip on the front, 2 felt strips on the front or the back, whatever we need to do. He's usually got one on the front and one on the back. I believe Pete is what he used to do for felt strips on the bass drum. But he said, so we're going to go back to the Ludwig kit. And this was in, I believe, a March about, and he was going to come out to the Playboy Jazz Festival that June. So I said, okay, I'll make him another kit. We'll make it work. He says, that'll be cool. That never happened because he had the heart attack, in between. And then I immediately, when this came up and Buddy got on the phone and said, I just can't get it to get that boom out of the bass drum. We're going to have to go back to Ludwig. I talked to Bob Yeager, who ran Professional Drum Shop. And he, in so many words, said, you idiot, you don't make a 6-ply 26-inch bass drum. It's going to ring like a doorbell no matter what you do. So he always had 12-ply bass drums usually made for him. So that's the long story short. I never had any endorsement. I was like, Buddy, take it out. And I'm thinking if he plays it for 6 months and let us like do some ads or something, that would be cool. He knew we certainly weren't paying him at all. So yes, he did play it for a period of time, and that's the brief history of that. So
any questions? Well, guys, if you've got any questions about that, please put it in the comments below. Obviously, with everything else, please say hi as well. We've got a couple of things. Graham Martin says, thanks, Don, for explaining why my 13 Heyman tom can be so difficult to tune. I've only had it from 1973. Well, guys, my early 60s Gretsch 13x8 tunes beautiful. Maybe just me. But there we are. Also another one, which Pete, I think you may agree with this. Dave Brown's saying, UK guys love American drums. It's simple. American drums were better finishers, better hardware, more choice than we ever had in UK. And obviously you're a big fan, obviously, of the Ludwig Atlas series, aren't you, Pete?
The Ludwig hardware that I liked the best was the Hercules hardware.
Oh, right, okay.
It's my first grown-up drum set was a hand-me-down from my dad, which is my super classic, which I still own. And but when he got those drums in 1964, he just got a shell pack. Didn't get any hardware. He used his old hardware with those drums. Like it was a mix of Premier and Ajax and so on. And he gradually added new hardware to them. So when I inherited those drums from him, he bought himself a new Rogers set when I was about 9 and gave me the Ludwig rather than buying me some second-hand drum set because he couldn't find anything that he thought was suitable. And the hardware that I liked was the Hercules because it was tubular steel. So it was incredibly sturdy and you know, you couldn't knock them over. But it was light because it was tubular. And that was one of the great hardware designs that, and they're over there in a traps case, those cymbal stands. Because they were really, really solid. They had a good spread. They were very adjustable. Slingerland copied them. And because they were tubular, they didn't weigh too much. And, you know, if you've ever put the same ride cymbal on a lightweight cymbal stand and then put it on a heavy double braced boom stand, you know it's always going to sound better on the lighter stand. You've got a heavy cymbal stand like anchored to the floor. I used to travel a lot and I would just take my cymbals and I'd be getting these rented sets all over Europe with this heavy duty hardware. I thought, why does this cymbal sound rubbish when I know it actually sounds great at home? And these heavy stands, they just suck the life out of the drums and cymbals. Snare drums as well. Put a snare drum on a really heavy stand, it's not going to play as well. It's not going to be as bright and lively as if you put it on a lightweight stand.
Yeah, a couple of hellos just coming on. Dawn Barkley, hello. Thank you for joining. Penny Reynolds, Fabio Campos, Frankie Richards, Richie. Yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll say if you're watching for the first time, please press that like and follow button on our Palace Drum Clinic page. Also, I don't think I mentioned actually, go to palacedrumclinic.com. You'll see what's actually happening here. All these videos that we've been doing over the series, because also we're on series 2 now of the chat show. They're all on there as well as the YouTube. So just type in Palace Drum Clinic, you can find it in YouTube. And then obviously you can find out what's actually happening coming on to the future clinics as well as events and stuff like that. Talking about future events, that leads me on to February. We have got our drum camp again 2021 from the 19th to the 21st of February after our amazing first year this year, but obviously we aren't able to do it in person, but we'll give you the same experience but online, so you'll get everything that you normally would get apart from the biscuits that you have to supply them yourselves, unfortunately. But yes, if you're more interested, just go to obviously Palace Drum Camp on Facebook, or just go to the www.palacedrumclinic.com and just basically go to the events and you'll see it there to sign up. It's only £50 to reserve your space, and then full balance by the 1st of February. Benefits are obviously you can have a drum kit at home and not annoy anybody sitting next to you. So there we are. So it may be a very, very good thing to do. Just talking about stuff. I want to do like a little bit of a personal thing with Don, if it's okay with you guys. Obviously, you did say you started, obviously, you know, with the pedals and everything. As I'm just looking down at my 9000 down there, which is, yeah, to be honest, it's like I think it's one of the Rolls Royce of pedals. It's up there. It's like in the gallery of pedals with the speaking and obviously with the Camco kind of thing. For me personally. With the whole thing, obviously, you said, you know, didn't know anything about business. You literally just, you know, you started it basically almost from, as almost things do, from a garden shed and everything else. Just tell us a little bit brief history, how you know, you literally got into basically the brand that now is DW Drums. How did it really got started?
Well, I started playing when I was 14, started playing professionally. Actually, I had to join the union when I was 14 because I was in a local Dixieland band that did a little television show. But when I was 16, I had the opportunity to study with Nick Ceroli, who was a great drummer, great teacher, and then Freddie when I was 20 for about 5 years. So I was able to have teaching be a part of my business model, along with playing in clubs, which back in those days, there was some really good clubs in town that played, you could make more money doing that than you would traveling in a touring band. So I liked staying in town, and I had 40, 50 students a week. And always had some, ideas, always was making a little gadget here and there for my drum set, or figuring out what I could do, or how I could make something a little different. As I said, the first thing I did was this adjustable seat. That was in the mid 70s. And that's where I decided I was teaching in 3 music stores. Of the 40, 50 students I had a week, more than half of them were driving age. I mean, they were older, they were high school or college. And so I thought, instead of going in 3 different locations around the LA area and then going to where I would work, every evening, why don't I start my own little studio, which I did first in my house, and then rented a little tiny facility in Santa Monica and called it Drum Workshop, which is where the idea of the name workshop came in as lessons. It was seminars. And one of the students I was teaching was the owner of the Campco Drum Company. I was teaching his son, and he had bought the Campco Drum Company from Custom Electronics, as it had gone through its history from the original George Way, which was the original round lug design inventor, to Camco, which was the company that made parts for George Way that he couldn't pay. So the guy ended up taking over his business, the Cam Company, and then it became the name Camco. And then that sold to Custom Electronics, and then he brought it, and was not a labor of love for him. He was a distributor, he was a trombone player, nothing against trombone players, but he wasn't doing it because he was, a drum aficionado. And he had the opportunity to become president of Roland US, which he did for over 30 years and retired several years ago. So he picked up his son one day and said, I'm going to sell the Campco brand to Japanese drum company Hoshino, which owned the Tama brand. Said they're not interested in any of the dies and molds. They just want the name to make the product in Japan. And so he said, if you'd be interested, he knew I was a tinkering kind of guy. He says, I could sell you probably the dies and molds. Otherwise, I'm going to trash them. And I'll just sell them the trade name. So long story short, that's how I ended up with the dies and molds to make a bass drum pedal. It's called the 5000 because if you were to look in the Campco catalog, it was the Campco Model 5000 series bass drum pedal. So I kept at least the model number, even though I couldn't keep, I didn't own the name Campco at the time. So that was a little bit of me for myself and my friends. And, I put some money together with the Musicians Credit Union and borrowing money from friends and my parents. And it wasn't a lot back in those days, but it was a lot back in those days. Thought, if somebody doesn't do this, nobody's going to be making the Campco pedal, because that, then we'd all be out of what was kind of the pedal that was our favorite pedal. Elvin Jones, all the guys that used to use that pedal. So it was going to be just kind of a little hobby at the beginning where I would want to start out making pedals. And then I found out that, you can't burn the, I'm now teaching, playing nights and starting to make products, and there's only so many hours in the day. So as it went on and on, I started teaching less and less. I kept playing up until the early 80s as basically my living as the company was evolving. So it started pretty much making the pedals. That's all I had money for, was the dies and molds that we bought. So it's like, what can you make out of a bass drum pedal? Well, we made an electronic pedal because, Simmons was really big in those days. We had the EP1, a little electronic trigger pedal. And then the thing that really took us over the top as far as our accountant was concerned, so that we would be at least breaking even, was the double pedal. So I looked at a double pedal that Jim Keltner was playing, which was the Schleichmann. It was the one that had the 2 springs on it, Zelmer Twin, and then Schleichmann had one too. I don't know if you're familiar with those double pedals, but they didn't work with the Universal. They really didn't work at all. But they were the concept of having 2 beaters on 1 bass drum. So I thought if I could perfect that and do it in a way in which you could really almost feel like you had 2 bass drums, or you could feel that way because your left foot's not going to be as good as your right anyway. In those days. Nowadays, that's certainly not true, Thomas Lang, thank you. So that was the double pedal kind of got us. And then we started making drums as a hobby in the 80s, a couple of drum sets a month. After a period of 4 or 5 years, there was enough to where some dealers were saying, hey, I've heard that you make drums, I'd like to try a kit. So we went to the NAMM show in 1990 for the first time really as a legitimate drum company. So that it kind of evolved from there. And the timing was right because, again, the 3 American companies, Jammer Pearl and Ludwig Slinger and Rogers, rather, had pretty much all fallen in the hands of larger corporations. the competitors for us in those days was Tama Pearl and Yamaha, and they weren't filling really the custom need of what I felt drummers were, certain drummers were looking for. We were certainly much more expensive as we are today, because we got the same problem the American drum company had back in those days. Our labor rate is 4 or 5 times what it is for what they're making over there. So I think it was a matter of filling a void that was needed out there. And we've just always kept ourselves at a level at which, we're not going to grow. Several years ago, John and I sat down and just said, this is the most we're going to make, the total amount of DW drums we can make in a month, and keep our eye on everything that goes out. So what else can we do? Because you have to grow, because your expenses keep going up. And that's when we came out with the PDP line, which is really a mirror of the best of what Ludwig, Slinger, and Rogers was doing back in the 60s and 70s. Those are great sounding drums. Also, a lot of our guys record on them. So, and then bringing the heritage back of Slingerland, it's going to be really, really cool. And then we have the license agreement. We don't own the Gretsch brand, but we have the license agreement to make and market them. So that was always kind of I can say I had something to do with the American drum industry from 1980 on. With Gretsch, it's like from 1880 on. I've got another 100 years of history of drum making that we can try and keep alive. So that's kind of how I got into it and grew it. Fortunately, my son has been involved as a CEO for the last almost 10 years. So I can keep doing the R&D part of it, which is what I enjoy the most, and that's what kind of got us here. So and I could go on and on about trials and tribulations and patents and licenses and things you have to go through to keep a company going. But that's kind of the very long and short of it. I hope that wasn't too long.
No, that's a spot on. Thank you very much. Christopher Dunn also, thank you very much for watching us as well. I think it's quite... it's something nostalgic, isn't it, about sort of all these the heritage of where we are? Because Pete's mentioned it many times. Our instruments just over the 100 years marks, and it's actually documented, which I think is the only really musical instrument it's actually been documented from its concept really through to modern day. How vital do you think it is, guys? That I'll come to Rob first. That we keep these kind of heritage things alive, because obviously thanks to Don, obviously Gretsch is still being made. Slingerland hopefully should be coming back very shortly and stuff like that. How do you think it's important for our history? Because obviously we learn from a lot of history to basically keep these drums and keep these, I suppose, the sounds that we grew up with alive.
Extremely important. I think on our vintage chat show we spoke at great length about how important that is. I mean, because it's not. Remember, we're talking about the kits and the history of the kits. And of course, hand in hand is all the players, that came up on those drum kits, and the advertising that brought to all the different magazines meant we bought the records, we sought them out. And there's drummers that I probably never would have come across if it wasn't for sifting through Dad's record collections and seeing them on the cover, And I think you can do that. I mean, I come from more of a jazz background like Pete, like all of us here, really. But the rock drummers can do that too. It's not like just an elitist thing for jazz musicians. You could do that in the rock world too. There's that whole tree from Charlie Watts on Gretsch upwards, that you can do with Gretsch, as well as we always talk about Ringo, but all those other companies have their guys too. So I think it's incredibly important. And I think the sort of system and education sort of setup that Ludwig had back in the day, I think is something that I think DW certainly took on with Drum Channel and stuff. That sort of, you can have the drum company selling to the shops and all that business, but then they supply to the high schools and the universities. And I think I'm right in saying, Don, you were influenced by that maybe with the Drum Channel and the educational side. I think, and I think that's really good. So we learned there how we can do that, how they can work together, plus the clinics and everything else. And as well, of course, us people owning these drum kits and taking them into the studio, recording them, knowing how good they are, taking them out to play, so the younger drummers can see. Because, like we said in that other show, if it's not there, it disappears. And it disappears very quickly. That could all be gone within 10, 15, 20 years. And that would be a crime. That would be terrible. And we have to keep passing it down to younger players. As I say, the equipment, the sound, but also the players. So we introduced them to all those old players like Baby Dodds and so on, going right back to the early days, So it's crucial, I believe, to keep it going. Absolutely.
Ludwig had their educational department that was somewhat aside from the manufacturing side, which worked for them for several years. Starting Drum Channel and going back and forth for years on how we get more into education with DW, I wanted to do something that was, player agnostic, so it doesn't make any difference what brand you play. We wanted to bring education from all different areas up into the forefront, which is why I started it as a completely separate company. But education, educate. I don't think you can sell a drummer something. I think that's true of products too. I think you can show him what you've got and show him what it might be able to do for him, and then he's going to decide if that fills a need or doesn't fill a need, educationally or product wise also. But I think that history is really good.
I think it's very important because it was only Thursday. I was actually chatting. I was actually taking a jazz rehearsal, but only two of them turned up because obviously climate. But it was at school, so I don't know where they went. Lunch break around the back sheds for a fag. I don't know. But it was having a chat to one of the guys, and and I told him slightly, I can't change your opinion of basically what you like because he's very very blinkered. He loves jazz, and it's just basically a very sort of jazz. He loves this like the ragtime stuff and all that, which is fantastic. Sort of bringing that back into youth with the guys that's like only sort of 15, 16. But we had the conversation, and it's like I said, look, I can't change your opinion on other types of music, but the best thing is to get educated, and that's the kind of thing that the Drum Channel is basically doing, isn't it? It won't change your opinion on what that is, but if you educate somebody to be aware of what's about, you may go, well, actually, I don't like that, but something there is basically like hitting home to me, isn't it? So it's that education side. It's not opinion changing. It's the education side, the knowledge part of it, isn't it, Don?
Yeah, we kind of took the philosophy of some of the great drum teachers, not necessarily what they showed you in terms of playing the instrument, but basically their concept. Freddie Gruber, Murray Spivak, and it wasn't that they were teaching you necessarily what you were going to go play at the gig that night. I mean, you would study with a lot of teachers who could show you what you were playing, but it was always what Freddie talked about and what kind of the theory of Drum Channel is the how, the what, and the why. You learn how to play because really, unlike any other instrument, we are the instrument. The drums themselves produce the sound. They're the bell of the horn. They're the string of the piano. But if you want to be able to play anything that you can hear musically or come up with, you've got to get your body able to do that. So that's what Freddie taught, most of the time. That's what Murray Spivak taught. And the list of drummers that they taught from Louis Bellson through David Garibaldi, all the Wackermans, goes on and on and on. Then there's what you play, and there's all kinds of millions of places you go to find out what to play. God knows YouTube is free, and you can sit there and be lost forever. You're going to be missing, and this is a problem, a little bit of understanding why they played what they played if you're just copying somebody play something. And that's kind of one of the missing ingredients that I'm bringing up in a lot of the interviews I've been doing recently on Drum Channel. That's why I think there's lessons that will teach you how to play, how to use your body to follow and motivate the bounce of the stick. And then there's a lot of lessons on what to play, because every great drummer is going to show you what he's doing, as long as you have the facility to do it. And then why do you play that or not play it, which is even more important. That kind of the difference between being a good drummer and really being a musician, the guy that gets the gig. And you guys know what I'm talking about. You see that happening with your students. I'm sure, Pete, you have a lot of students teach.
I have a few. I don't. I prefer to keep it relatively limited in terms of numbers, just so I can give the individual, I think, the right level of attention. I could do a lot more, but
Sure. No.
I'd rather really kind of pinpoint 10 guys who I know, with whom I have the best possible rapport, and I feel are really kind of on the same wavelength as I am, and rather than doing like off the shelf drum lessons, because I can't play the same set twice. I can't play the same drum solo twice, and I can't teach the same drum lesson twice. So
I'm a huge advocate of private instruction. I think that's very, very important in the life of any drummer that's really aspiring to take it to the next level.
I think so.
which is where a lot of teachers are using. We have a whole back end of Drum Channel that a lot of people don't know about if they're not teachers, but you can go in and actually drag and drop lessons into your students' portal every week. So you can give them lessons on how to play off of the site while you're teaching them what to play. At the same time, you know, the attention span of the younger drummer is a little shorter than back in the day.
Yeah.
So you want to spend as much time having fun with them and keeping them engaged as you can, especially beginning students. While at the same time, if they're going to be going from middle school to high school, they got to learn how to read. They got to learn how to read a chart. But there's a lot of things you can do well online, but you can't replace the mentoring. I think of a long list, almost every drummer we've had on Drum Channel who have stories about how their experience with their teacher kept them going. And Neil Peart said he was going to quit. It was his last drum lesson. And the teacher said, let's try it for another month. I don't think I'm any good at this. No, let's just try. Okay, I'll try it for another month. Well, if he had been studying online, he would have just given up. He would have thought that wasn't for me. So
yeah, the rapport is such a, you there's great content out there. You can go onto YouTube and see this guy and that guy. But if you can't interact with them, then there's an element that's missing, I think.
Another big subject that we won't have to get into now, but you just mentioned it, looking at YouTube. We grew up listening to records, listening to drummers, and then figure out what they did. If you visually are looking at somebody and copying it, it's a different learning experience. So that's
definitely.
Another whole, but that's the way most young drummers are learning. They're seeing somebody do something and copying what they're doing without really hearing necessarily what they're playing or understanding how they're doing it. But don't we go on that subject? That's another whole.
Well, that's one of the best lessons I ever had, really. It's because I actually had my uncle's drum teacher when I was at school. I had half an hour once a fortnight if I was lucky. But I often used to go and sit, if he was doing like a pub gig or down the road or something, I used to sit behind him and watch him play. And it's like something that I was learning, a lesson, I was just thinking, what if my uncle does this? And then you just watch him playing, because obviously I had absolutely A1 sort of view. And I was like, wow, he uses that all the time. Wow, it's just like he's doing that. Oh, and it was just such a learning curve that I could see basically from what my drum teacher was trying to basically develop with me. Basically, I could see it actually being developed in a musical context, and it was invaluable. It really was invaluable in that kind of sense. And there's one quick story for you guys before I can see the time's running off, and I've got one more question to ask. Really, is that in my lesson, my teacher, and he was and I've got it here, and I still keep to bless him. His name was Angus Honeyman. He was from Norwich, and he died the back end of the 1990s, unfortunately. But I owe him a lot. Thank you very much. If you're listening in from above in the big band in the sky, but he wrote basically he didn't have any music to hand out. He always hand wrote it with his stick with the line, and then he wrote the notes. It was wonderful to watch. But he just wrote right, left, right, right, left. He said, "Okay, we're doing this now." He didn't explain what it was. He was just gonna. And I was like, "Okay," and I got a little bit despondent. I was like, I can do this. So I went to my uncle and I said. He said, Mr. Honeyman's basically giving me this, right, left, right. I can do that. He went, yeah, but can you go, brah, 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 and can you put it around? He went, oh, I know what he wants me to do now. And that kind of that interaction of basically where that basically was and where it's led to. I use that story all the time. It's for special students where it's okay, great. If you practice anything this week, you've done any rudiments. Yeah, I can. Well, as Pete always says. Why are you practicing what you can play? Why aren't you practicing what you can't play? And it's like, yeah, but I can do. I said, yeah, can you do this? When's the last time you practiced sing strokes? One guy said the other day, about a year and a half ago. Why? Aren't they the most used thing you're going to be using? Yeah. There we go, John, hallelujah. But it's no. I think all that kind of stuff is impersonal. Okay, we're living in a situation at the moment which we're having to cope with. But next year when we can get back to it, I'm so looking forward to having that interaction with my private students, especially a couple of them which are doing so well. I'm noticing the time. We've only got a quarter of an hour. These things do sit past so quickly. Jimmy Washington, thank you very much for watching. I say, if you are liking what we're talking about, we have many other ones you can watch on the Facebook site. Also, go to Facebook or the PDChatshow underneath my eyebrow, underneath my eyebrow, underneath my elbow there. You get all of these ones from the first series as well as the second series one now. I've got one last one, obviously talking about what we did talk about. And guys, listen out to the question out there. Please put in the comments below your answers to this question. I'm going to ask all of you in turn, but I'm going to come to Rob first because you haven't chatted for a while. I don't need to fall asleep. It's getting late, mate, isn't it? For you,
I'm 50 now, so
yeah, I'm 50. Don't you know?
time.
Watch it.
Yeah. Which brand would you like to see back on the shelf?
Slingerland. And Don knows this because we've been sending emails back and forth about snare drums and so on and so forth. I think Pete agrees as well. You know,
Yeah.
I think if
Well,
we can...
what was your first clue?
Don't know. What's giving it away?
You know, I think that would be fantastic. You know, with all the modern technology we've got to bring back the past with the present and try and make those things work, that would be absolutely superb. Because some of their snare drums are just some of the most fantastic snare drums I've ever played. And I think you all know I bore you to death with it, but I love the student models. I think they're absolutely fantastic. And I've been talking to Don about it because I'm fed up of taking, you know, some of mine along to sessions. I would like a more modern version that doesn't detune as much, but they're just incredible sounding drums. So for me, definitely Slingerland, and I couldn't be happier that it's in the hands of Mr. Lombardi, I have to say.
Good, thank you very much. Slight twist on this one for you, Pete. Which British brand would you like to see back? It's a good one, isn't it?
Ooh.
Making him think. It's making him think.
I would be fascinated if there was a renaissance of Ajax, but I have to caveat that with the following: that you probably don't remember this, but in the 1980s, somebody tried to start Heyman up again.
Yeah.
And they were just these very nasty budget drums, probably made in Taiwan or China, and they kind of looked like Heyman, but they weren't. And I think that the point with the rejuvenation of any heritage drum brand is that it should retain and maintain the values of what made it great in the first place. I remember there was this, I think it was the Frankfurt show in either 1985 or 6. It says, hey, Heyman drums are coming back, and you know, actually, no, they're not. And it was just like this budget stuff with the logo on and a round lug that was something like the original. I think of all the no-name drum companies that you see at Music China in Shanghai, and it was probably one of those who was making it back then. And I think the important thing is the keyword quality. And we think of these great brands because of what they stand for, because of what they represent, because of the quality of the instruments and the legendary players who helped to make them famous. And I think what deep down what we feel is that we want to feel some sort of continuum of that history and heritage and see it maintained. And this is what I used to sit down at like board meetings with the guys at Premier when I was there and say, look, you've got this amazing legacy and heritage. You should be doing something with it. And we never really quite got over that hurdle.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it?
Great sadness.
Yeah. Guys, just reading out, there's quite a few shouts for Slingland, Radio King as well, Olympic from Peter Williams, Brian Borowski, thank you very much for watching. Also, Will Elison. Brian was saying it seems like the student models are built better. Is that the way? I don't believe I'm actually saying this on a drum chat show. It's the way with like clarinets also with Yamaha student models. It's the way better clarinets. It holds up just like a Slingerland. Thank you for redeeming yourself after saying clarinets. Yeah, I'll have to come to you, Don. What obviously, you obviously got some sort of major brands with you now, but apart from the ones that you are involved with, which brand would you like to see back on the shelf?
Sure. and the interpretation of back on the shelf, you mean back in the market, not up on the shelf where you're not.
No,
seeing
not
it.
off the shelf. No, we don't. No, we actually want to use it. Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
We put
yeah.
the drums in the boot over there.
Basically, come back into the whole kind of the world of drums. Yeah, so we can play. Yeah.
Well, that's. I mean, the ones that we have that we're looking at are, Ludwig obviously is still in the market. We'll be bringing Slingerland back, which was great. It was owned by Gibson for many, many years, and the new owners of Gibson could have gotten, actually, if they were shopping it aggressively. I don't believe we were probably the highest bidder as far as selling it to someone who would want to just make it overseas and put their name on it, which again is thinking that you can trick somebody to put it back into the market because it happens to have the same name on it, even though it's people who were buying Slingerland even back in the day more than Ludwig. Certainly Camco and Gretsch were buying a sound of the drums more than they were buying a brand name. So they wouldn't, if they were going to go add another tom onto their drum set, they would know if it was made the way the rest of their drum set was made, not just because it had the name on it, which actually was a big problem when Hoshino came out with Camco about 3 years after they bought the name. They came out with Camco drums, which was very shortly lived because they weren't Camco drums. They had the Camco name on it, but Camco people wanted a drum that sounded like a Camco drum, which was more like a DW drum back in the day. I guess if I had to say if there was one that I have nothing to do with bringing back, it would be Camco, which is not a name that we own and a name we probably will never have the opportunity to own. But there's such a heritage, with that. And then there's the predecessor to that was the George Way Drum Company, which Ron Donnet has. So, but it's Rogers is owned by a Taiwanese company. And so I'm all for people being able to buy inexpensive drums because it'll get more. We are playing a very expensive instrument to get started on compared to a ukulele or a guitar. So the more, studio, if you want to call them series or entry level drums can be made at an affordable price as possible offshore. That's great because it'll get people into it. So I guess I'd have to pick Camco. Does that sound like a strange choice?
Not at all. Not at all. Not from where we're sitting. Brian, thank you ever so much for replying back. No, we're absolutely fine with the clarinet thing. It said, I am a drummer in my life and end up selling instruments because I have kids in college. And sorry about that, but I play with many musicians. Play jazz, rock and roll, play country, and I talk to these other people that tell me feedback about their instruments. Look, we're all musicians. We're just the friendliest of the lot because we generally swap ideas and stuff like that. Guys, thank you ever so much. But yeah, thank you very much. Graham Martin, agree with Pete Heyman, but with the same quality of shells and lugs, but not the original crap hardware. I changed my hardware to Premier in the 1970s. So there we go. Yeah, Premier, so the lock fast. Some people hate it, some people love it, don't they? I personally love it for certain things, not on drum kit, but in my orchestral world, I love it because of the flat bass. I can slip it in and out and everywhere, and because you're not hitting it hard, it won't fall over anyway. But there we are, guys. I'm just time is obviously escaping us, and we've got one question which I think we need to just hit on for Don, because obviously if you are subscribed to Rhythm Magazine, this would have landed on your doorstep, hopefully this morning. And as you can see, it is long awaited, overdue, but I was so glad, obviously, the guys at Rhythm actually put it there. I haven't had chance, I've had screaming kids all day, but I will have chance. But Pete, you'll be quite pleased at the back there. 6 of the best. Do you see that, Pete?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 6 of the best. So, British Drum Company, so there we are. So yeah, and I've just got myself. I've done a deal with. Thank you, Ian Matthews, for that. I've got his Bluebird. I played a Bluebird, and I've got to have one of those in my life. It's as you call it, Pete. The closest to like a revamped model of the sort of Ludi 402 kind of thing. Amazing drum.
Yeah, similar,
yeah.
Different, heavier,
yeah.
different tuning register.
Yeah,
but
fantastic drum. Yeah,
a really classy instrument in its own right, without having to compare it to anything.
But let's go to the front cover anyway. Obviously Neil Peart, sadly we lost him, but he has his own pedestal basically in the drumming world and legends. hate him, loathe him, whatever you like, he still deserves basically what he has done for the drumming world. And we've got one question, basically, Don. It's from Andy Ward. He said, "Is there any?" Let me find the exact one, but he is just saying about the drum channel. Is there? Can I ask Don if there are plans for the drum channel to honour Neil Pearton's contribution to the channel?
Uh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, we had plans and actually had a venue in mind to do a major live drum day event here in Hollywood, and was something we were going to try and do in June. And then, of course, when everything shut down, it's all kind of put on hold right now. But I mean, in a small way, we've put up a tribute show which has the content that he had on Drum Channel available, so you could see it all in one place with Don Perry and with Terry and so there's things that have been done, tributes that Modern Drummer did recently online, but we talked about this actually last week. I'd like to wait until we can get into a venue, and I think that's what he would like, is to really.
Yeah.
There's so many guys that want to come and play and be part of it, and we could have some real fun surprises at something like that. And so that, to me, that would be, and like all the great, talking about the history of drumming and all the great drummers, there's new generations that come along. So we need to keep, what they brought to the instrument alive, to all the young guys too. And so I think if we do it, hopefully by the end of next year, we're definitely want to do something big for sure. He was a dear friend and a huge advocate of education too. So definitely.
Do we know what's happening with these drums at all? Are they with the family, or is it or they or where are they?
We've got the Time Machine kit. We don't have the bass of it, which is where all the hardware was screwed into the bass, so we have to recreate that. The red kit is actually coming back from the PS Museum this week and next week, I guess, and we're going to set it up in our showroom behind the glass. So, and then the other kits are in storage up in Canada. So we're hoping to get another conversation we had last year before all this happened, looking at maybe having our own little museum area of a building that's down the street from where we're located, DW, that we could set up with. Terry would actually go in and play his kit, so you could go to the museum and watch him playing at the same time, because he needs a museum-sized place just to set it up.
Yeah, he does.
So, anyway, so that'll be coming down the road also. Thank you.
Right, fantastic. Brian Borowski is basically saying need to get Taylor Hawkins from the Food Fighters to play the tribute. He's just pretty school rush. So as I say, there'll be lots of people basically want to be knocking down the door just to basically give you a tribute, isn't there?
When he used to come out and go through the whole tour for a month every time before they would go out, I was surprised at some of the diehard fans who I didn't know were, that would stand outside the DW studio and they'd be air drumming to what he was doing, and he would get a kick out of it too. And he was excited to meet them as they were, to meet him. Josh Fries, huge fan, and Chad Smith, huge fan. So yeah, we would put together quite a nice group of people to do it upright. That's first thing I did with Neil was the Buddy Rich Memorial Concert he wanted to do in 2008 when we were just building the studio, 2007, 2008. So that was like the first major event we did, and a lot of those drummers that were on that, would like to be in his memorial too. So we'll kind of tie the two together, because he was a huge Buddy fan also.
Yeah, well, there we go. Well, guys, thank you ever so much for watching at home. Thank you very much for your comments as well. I'll say, if you have managed to last this long, please, if you're watching this on replay, please just hashtag replay in the comments so we can actually see your comments. Thank you ever so much for everyone for watching and all your fantastic comments and questions and everything else. Again, it wouldn't be the same without you guys asking these questions. I say this every week. We don't mind sitting here talking. We can talk for hours with each other about what our passions are in the musical and drumming world. But obviously, for you guys out there, it's so nice for you to come and watch this, and we feel so humbled that you do watch this. So thank you ever so much for that. Just a couple of little things, obviously. If you are obviously watching this for the first time on the Palace Drum Clinic Facebook page, please just like push the that little thumbs up, like button, follow it, and then we'll be very grateful. And you'll be very grateful because you'll see what's coming up in the future. Now you're asking me, I can hear it. It's basically you're shouting on the screen. Well, who have you got coming up next week? Well, I'm glad you asked that, guys, because we have got hopefully all the way from Belgium. So we're going European this way. Michael Shack. So he'll be on next week. That'll be another fantastic show for us. So Michael Shack will be on next week. So that's next Saturday at 8:30 on the Palace Drum Clinic page, which is obviously British Greenwich Mean Time. So just a couple of other things. Andrew Bark is watching. Thank you very much for watching. You can catch it up obviously on Facebook because obviously we're going to stop in a minute. But I will put this on YouTube 24 hours afterwards, so you'll be able to find it there. Just go to YouTube, put Palace Drum Clinic in, and you'll be able to watch it there. But no, thank you so much, guys, for your lovely comments. Again, thank you, Rob and Pete, for your wisdom and your support throughout everything else. I'll be lost without you too, so thank you once again. It's nice to see Pete back in his garage with the drums and everything else. It's obviously not too cold in there today. So it's lovely to see Rob's had a wash for his boss as well. And all that. And again, Don, thank you ever so much for joining us on the PD Chat Show. It's been an absolute privilege. I am dare to say this most probably won't be the first and last time. Hopefully there'll be many more, because many more stories to tell, and anecdotes and wisdom to share.
Love to do it. Thank you very much for inviting me. This has been a real pleasure.
No, well, thank you so much. And guys, obviously, thanks again out there. So there's only one thing for us to say. Thanks again, Pete, Rob, and our special guest, Don. Thank you all guys out there for watching us, and we'll be back next week at 8:30 with Michael Shack. So you guys stay safe out there, and we'll see you all during the week. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.